Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today, I don't want to talk about a specific book that I read, but rather I want to talk about a book tag. The New York Times by the book tag that's been making the rounds. I was sort of tagged, but not really, by Lucas over at the Bits of Lit. And since I haven't done a book tag in a while, I figured, why not go for it? Especially because the questions were stuff that I could answer rather than stuff that's like genre specific that maybe I don't read and can't talk about. So, without further ado, let's get into these questions. But before I do, I should specify that I tag everyone, no one in specific. I don't know who's done this and who hasn't. So Codex Cantina, if you haven't done it, go do it. Noah, everyone who reads it must converse. If you haven't done it, go do it. Everyone just go do it. Let's get to the questions. The first question is, what book is on your nightstand now? That is a good question. Unfortunately, I do not have a nightstand. No nightstand next to my bed where I'm reading books. I don't really read books in bed. I'm much more of a couch reader, work reader, something like that. But a book that I have, just lying around waiting to be read, that's the Graveyard Book, which I'm currently reading. So I guess my nightstand is really more my backpack, just a book that I'm always carrying around, ready to read at a moment's notice. And that one again is the Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman, a book that I've just started reading, and I think is really interesting, given the setup so far. Question 2, what was the last truly great book that I read? Well, if we're going by truly great and not just, good or fine or interesting, the last truly great book that I read was Stoner by John Williams. I've talked about this multiple times on my channel, and I'm not gonna go into it about all the awesome things about it, of which there are many, because you probably heard me talk about it before. But Stoner by John Williams is one of the best books ever written, in my opinion. It tells a great story from start to finish about one man's life. And what's interesting about it is that Stoner's life isn't that interesting. He's a boring man. He's conflict avoidant. So you like that, you think that'd be a big problem for the plot, but it's not really. And the reasons he avoids conflict and the reasons later that he chooses to engage in conflict are both pretty revealing about him, and tell John Williams uses Stoner's life as a means to talk about humanity and the meaning of life in general. And I think it's brilliant. It's a truly great book, one that everyone should give a read, even if not everyone will enjoy it, because it might be hard to get into. But so yeah, before I just keep droning on and on about it, I'll stop right there and say that's the last truly great book that I've read. Question 3, if you could meet any writer, alive or dead, who would it be and what would you want to know? I don't really know too many living writers that I'd want to meet. They seem interesting, but I don't really have a drive to meet any living writers. Maybe Mara Wilson. She played Matilda and a bunch of other roles in her youth, and she's a writer now. Also does acting from time to time, but I'd love to meet her and talk about social justice stuff and theater and that kind of thing. But I think my interest in Mara Wilson is more to do with her acting chops and stuff like that. But if we're talking, a writer for wanting to beat them for the writing reasons is John Steinbeck. The dude is dead. I love if we could reanimate him Frankenstein style, so I could talk to him and chat with him about his writing process, some of the choices he made in his writing, specifically about Kathy Ames and East of Eden, and ultimately I think I would really like to talk with him about socialism, because he had a lot to say about it in his writing, and I'd really like to talk about bring him to the present and talk about what we're doing right now and what needs to be done better to help the working class. And there's just so much to talk about with John Steinbeck, and he's one of my favorite writers, so I would love to reanimate him and hope that he's not interested in eating my brains, and we can talk about various book related stuff. Question 4 is, what books might we be surprised to find on your shelf? I guess I have a couple of young adult fiction books on my shelf. Before I Fall by Lauren Oliver and Holes by Louis Sacker, both really quality books. Both kind of odd to have on the shelf of a 28-year-old man, but they're pretty quality books, so I think they're appropriate for any age, I guess. Plus, Before I Fall is one of my top 10 favorites, along probably with Holes, but Holes is good regardless if it's in my top 10 or not. You might also be surprised to find The Life and Death of WCW. I'm interested in wrestling. I talk about it from time to time, but I don't think I talk about it too much on this channel. I'd be really interested in reading more wrestler biographies for this channel, I guess. But yeah, so something that a lot of people might be surprised to find is that one wrestling book that I own that's pretty groovy and amazing. Also, poetry. Some people might be interested or might be surprised to find that there's Shel Silverstein on my shelf, but those that know me probably wouldn't be too surprised. But yeah, I got a couple books of poetry. I do Poetry Thursday, so not a big surprise. And I don't think there's too much that's a big surprise. I have a lot of weird books, a lot of unusual books that you might guess at, since this is a book that focuses on unusual literature. I think nothing too surprising for y'all out there. Question 5 is, how do I organize my personal library? I think Lucas at Bits of Lit summed it up pretty nicely when he said he doesn't. And yeah, I don't really organize my personal library. Everything's kind of thrown together. I think a large problem is that the bookshelf that I made is a bad bookshelf, and it's on the verge of breaking at any moment, and so I can't put too many books on it, so I can't really organize it in a specific way. But I have a whole bunch of boxes that I just throw books into, and it is there's no rhyme or reason, but I can easily find the books if I need to find them. I do have a Kindle where I usually organize books by author's last name, just for ease of finding. I think that's pretty nice to have them organized that way, rather than chaotic, based on when I last bought a book, because then I'll never find what I'm looking for unless I use the search bar. So not very organized, but I guess there's more organization in my Kindle. And then question 6 is, what book have you always meant to read and haven't gotten around to yet? Anything you embarrassed to never have read? I guess the books that I've been meaning to read are a lot of the classics. There's so many of them out there that I just never had the time to get to. I'm not really embarrassed about not having read a book or anything like that, just because there's so many books out there, you're not going to be able to get to them all. One book that I've been meaning to get to for a while is Uncle Tom's Cabin. I've been meaning to read that since high school, and I just haven't gotten around to it. It seems like an important to read, historically speaking, and I'm sure Harriet Beecher Stowe has a lot to say about slavery and the slavery system in the United States and whatnot. And I would be interested in getting around to that eventually, but it's going to take a while. Something I'm kind of embarrassed to have not read is Stephen King's books. A lot of those are just because I'm not into Stephen King's style. It's very hard to get into how he writes. it's very jarring, and he writes for a specific kind of person, and I guess I'm just not that person, unfortunately. But I would like to get through at least one of his books in my lifetime. Maybe It or Cujo or something like that. I started reading Jerusalem's Lot, but I've never finished it. Sorry, it's Salem's Lot. My bad. But I would like to finish that eventually. It's just very hard to get into Stephen King. He's obnoxious as a writer. Number 7, disappointing, overrated, or just not good. What book did you feel you were supposed to like but didn't? Do you remember the last book you put down without finishing it? So yeah, I'm not really sure if there's a book that was like strongly disappointing. I guess it's, again, going back to Stephen King. All of his books I feel like are kind of overrated in that people hype them up to a great extent, and I'm sure they're good, but I've never been able to get into them, and so I guess I don't see what all the fuss is about with Stephen King. To some extent, also his Joe Hill, his son, whose name I can't remember, can't really see what all the fuss is about there as well. And I guess, because I never finished Salem's Lot, that would be the book that I put down without finishing. But mostly I like to finish all the books that I read, because without finishing it, like, what's there to talk about? Even if you don't finish a book, that's something that you can talk about in regards to quality or how you felt about a book. So, making sure to finish a book, even if you didn't like it or something. I'm confusing myself with how I'm talking here, but like, just finish a book and you didn't like it, then, that's something to talk about. But I do try to finish all the books that I read because, it's time invested, I guess. The sunk cost fallacy and all that. Question 8 is, what kind of stories am I drawn to, and what do I steer clear of? Well, I'm very drawn to science fiction-y type stories. Like Philip K. Dick. Stories that look at an existing or near to existing technology and are like, "Yo, this is kind of weird. Let's elaborate on it," or something like that. Also interested in Groundhog Day type stories, like Before I Fall, or in movies like Groundhog Day, for example, or Happy Death Day to You, or even Palm Springs, which was a really good movie that I watched recently. So I'm really drawn to the bizarre kind of stories there that use the Groundhog Day formula, which is usually successful because you can tell a story about a character's arc through a repeated days or repeated something, and it's usually successful, and that's what I like about it. How it's almost always a banger, in my opinion. But I also really like generational stories told through multiple generations of the same family, like in East of Eden. That I'm drawn to that because like you can talk about how like a family deals with the same problem through multiple generations, or how like a family has demons that last through multiple generations, something like that. And it's usually always pretty good, although I'm sure there's exceptions to that. But yeah, worth reading, worth checking out, in my opinion. And then also stories like Stoner, deep character studies over the course of a character's life. You can usually get into some pretty heavy stuff with like the meaning of life or philosophy or whatever you want to talk about. It's usually pretty good as well, but you can also totally fail, and it's interesting to see those failures as well, because like why did it go wrong specifically for that author? I really like those stories, but I in terms of what I steer clear of, there isn't much. I guess the biggest example is deep fantasy, just because there's too much lore to get into. Like it was hard to get into the Lord of the Rings series. Like I loved it, but there's just so much world building in the span of 6 books technically, and it's deep, and like everybody has their own set of rules, its own set of like systems and races in their fantasy. It's hard to get into. And then another thing that I don't like is romance, because usually it's kind of sexist or very wish fulfillment on the part of the author, and so it's always hard to get into and get around the the weird dialogue that they always write for the characters. So I guess those two things are things that I'm not a big fan of. If I could require the president to read one book, what would it be? That is question 9. As Lucas over at the Bits of Lit said, the president doesn't read. Donald Trump is, a person who is not big into reading. It's possible he doesn't know how to read, but because he doesn't read, what's the sense of recommending him anything? He's not going to read it. I'm going to recommend him the June 2nd, 2002 edition of Time magazine for kids. He's not going to read it, but hey, maybe he'll get something out of it. It's tough seeing a president who's so anti-education that it seeps into everything around him, and he's just the dumbest president. In terms of the incoming president, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, my bad. I would recommend a book that I recently read, In Dubious Battle. It talks about the plight of the working class, and I feel that's something that Joe Biden doesn't really focus on enough. A lot of his donors are the super rich, and if we're gonna become a more progressive country, the president should really start caring about working class and not just lip service. They have to actually know what is affecting the working class, and that's something that I don't feel Joe Biden is really aware of. And I just think more can be done on his part. And so reading that book, reading any of Steinbeck really would benefit, not just the president, but everyone in general. I just can't get enough of that Steinbeck. So I think that's my answer there. Then the final question 10, is what do you plan to read next? My answer to that is I'm currently reading the Graveyard Book, but I believe after that I'm going to read The End of Everything, Astrophysically Speaking by Katie Mack, a book that I've been meaning to get to pretty much all month, but other things have just come up, and I think it's a pretty interesting book, considering it's about the end of the universe and science, and those are things I'm interested in, and those are things I want to talk about on this channel. I want to move into talking about in addition to the weird, some non-fiction-y things. Lucas at the Bits of Lit has also told me I need to talk about more non-fiction, and I'm going to. It's just it's hard to find nonfiction that really enthralls me and makes me want to share it with the world. It's like talking about psychology. I feel like I'm boring people because it's really only I'm the only one who might be interested in it. So why would I share it with anyone else? No one's gonna really care what I'm saying. So that's an issue that I deal with. Anyways, that's the answer to my question, the last question. Anyway, those were my answers to the New York Times By the Book tag. A pretty fun tag. Once again, I'm tagging everyone out there. If you have something to say about any of the questions that I answered, feel free to comment below. I would love to hear from you. We can have a discussion about books and stuff. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this fun tag and do it themselves. And in the meantime, I wish you the best of luck in your best-selling and weird travels. Farewell.